Okay, well, welcome back to the third part of the protein lecture. In this lecture, we will explore three important questions. Why do we need proteins? How do we break down proteins? And in our bodies, how are these proteins digested? Well, in our bodies, we have a constant turnover of proteins. So we need proteins to basically be able to operate our bodies. Their proteins are involved in cellular growth and repair and maintenance of cells. They are also involved as acting as enzymes. Proteins make up enzymes, and enzymes, which are usually proteins, speed up chemical reactions without themselves being changed by chemical reaction themselves. Enzymes therefore can bind to substances and bring them together or break them apart, and can transform one substance into another. And in our bodies, each cell contains thousands of enzymes that facilitate specific cellular reactions. For example, the enzyme phospho-fructokinase is critical for driving the rate at which we break down glucose and use it for energy during exercise, so that without phosphofructokinase, we would be unable to generate energy at a fast enough rate to allow us to physically be active. Another category of proteins is hormones. Hormones are substances that act as chemical messengers in the body. Some hormones are made from amino acids, whereas others are made from lipids, such as steroids. Hormones are stored in various glands in our bodies and are released in response to changes of the body to the environment. They act as the body's organs and tissues to store the body to normal conditions. For example, insulin, a hormone that is made from amino acids, acts on the cell's membrane to facilitate the transport of glucose into cells. Other examples of amino acid-containing hormones are glucagon, which respond to conditions of low blood glucose, a thyroid hormone which helps control our resting metabolic rate. Proteins are also involved in fluid and electrolyte balance. Electrolytes are electrically charged particles that assist in maintaining fluid balance. Our bodies, to function properly, need fluid and electrolytes that must be maintained at certain healthy levels inside and outside of the cells within the blood vessels. And proteins attract fluids, and proteins that are in the bloodstream, for example, in the cells, and the spaces surrounding the cells work together to keep the fluids moving across the spaces in proper quantities to maintain fluid balance and blood pressure. When protein intakes are deficient, the concentration of proteins in the bloodstream is insufficient to draw fluid from tissues across the blood vessel walls, and the fluids that collects in the tissues then cause edema, which is the swelling that you see. In addition to being uncomfortable, edema can lead to serious medical problems. Also, proteins do things like maintain pH balance, and also proteins compose of a special antibodies in our bloodstreams that help protect against disease. These antibodies are special proteins that are critical components of the immune system. So when a foreign substance attacks the body, the immune system produces these proteins called antibodies to protect us, especially against bacteria, virus, and toxins. Allergens sometimes too cause us to produce antibodies against them. For example, are antigens that can trigger antibody production. So an antigen is any substance, but typically not a protein, that our bodies recognize as foreign. Also, protein can be used as an energy source by the liver, the amine groups from the amino acids to produce called deamination. So the takeaway message is the proteins do a wide variety of functions in our body, and it's very important that we regularly eat adequate amounts of fat and carbohydrates and proteins so that we have enough dietary protein around to perform the required work without using up other nutrients. Unfortunately, our bodies cannot store excess dietary protein. As a consequence, eating too much protein results in the removal and excretion of the nitrogen in the urine and the use of the remaining components for energy. Any remaining components not used for energy can be converted and stored as body fat. So how do we break down proteins? Well, virtually no enzymatic digestion of proteins occur in the mouth. And proteins in food that are chewed, crushed, and moistened with saliva to ease swallowing and to increase surface area of the protein, far more efficient digestion can occur. So proteins, when they reach the stomach, are acted on by hydrochloric acid, which of course denatures the protein strands. And the hydrochloric also converts the inactive enzyme pepsinogen into an active form called pepsin. And although pepsin itself is a protein, it is not denatured by the acid in the stomach because it's evolved to work optimally in an acidic environment. The hormone gastrin also controls both the production of the hydrochloric acid and the release of pepsin, linking both food and acting as a chewing the food stimulus and the gastrin-producing cells located in the stomach. Pepsin begins in the stomach to break down proteins into single amino acids and shorter polypeptides. These amino acids and polypeptides then travel to the small intestine for further digestion. So the key takeaway here is not much digestion of proteins occur in the mouth, and that the hydrochloric acid found in the stomach is responsible for denaturing the protein structure and activate the protein pepsin so that it can cleave the protein that comes from the diet. And so pepsin is an enzyme that breaks down the proteins into short polypeptides and amino acids. So digestion of protein continues in the small intestine. You have pancreatic enzymes called proteases, which complete the digestion of protein into single amino acids. Indigestible proteins are of lower quality for the nutritional purposes. So here's a diagram from your book that you can see what happens in terms of protein digestion in each compartment of the body. In the mouth, the proteins are basically crushed and moistened by the saliva, but not much digestion actually occurs. And then in the stomach is where you have the activation through the hydrochloric acid of pepsin, which breaks down the proteins into single amino acids and smaller polypeptides. Then you have the food going into the smaller intestine, where you have proteases, which are secreted to digest the polypeptides into smaller units, and the cells of the small intestine complete the breakdown of the polypeptides into single amino acids. The liver is responsible for transporting the amino acids and sent to cells as needed. So how do we break down proteins? Well, protein digestibility affects protein quality. And animal proteins, such as from meats or dairy products, soy products, and legumes, are of high digestible quality. They get digested well, whereas grains and vegetable proteins are less digestible. So how much protein should we eat? Well, nitrogen balance is defined as a procedure used to determine a person's protein needs. Proper proteins intake, of course, depends on three major factors: the activity level of the person, the age of the person, as well as the health status. For example, each day a sedentary adult requires 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. But that can vary greatly depending on if that person is, what stage of life they are, if they're children, if they're adolescents, if they're pregnant or a lactating woman. The athletes should take more protein because they're breaking down more protein as they exercise. So how much protein should we eat? Well, the recommended RDA is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Or, in other words, to think about it, is 10 to 35% of your total energy intake should be in the form of protein.